All right, hey everybody, welcome to the Mercenary Musician Podcast. My name's Peter Coulter.
My name's Chad Broussard, and today we're going to be talking about tipping etiquette.
This is a good topic. I like this one. So, when I started out, I kind of approached the thing without realizing how important tips were. And when I run into people who are just getting started, I still hear people say, like, hey, things like, should I have a tip jar? Which is where I'm sitting right now sounds ridiculous, but I can see how when you first start out, you'd think like, are tip jars appropriate? Are tips really important? Is it a big part of my pay? And part of my story was I started out, my first professional gig was playing bass guitar in the pit, in the orchestra pit in musical theater when I was in eighth grade and all through high school. And that, obviously, you're not getting tipped. You're just getting a paycheck from theater. So that is kind of how I started approaching it when I started doing the solo cover thing full time. I had a tip jar. Sometimes I'd forget it at home. I didn't consider it a big deal. I didn't consider soliciting, asking for tips part of the thing. I just thought I was a guy who comes in and plays music, and basically that's the job. And the vast majority of my pay comes from the bar, who is paying me to entertain their crowd. And that kind of made sense to me for a while. And I started, really what changed my perspective on this was meeting more musicians. And I have a particular friend in mind who would tell me, like, yeah, I made like $120 in tips last night. I was like, whoa, that's like almost, it's not negligible. That's like that can almost double your pay depending on if your price floor is $150 for 3 hours, or if you do a 2-hour gig, that's $150. Making a buck 20 in tips is no small deal. It's a huge thing, and if you add that up over 4, 5, 6, 7 gigs a week, over the course of a year, I mean, 7 gigs a week. If you're making, let's say, just $100, averaging $100 in tips. I don't mean to say just $100 in tips average. That'd be a pretty sweet average. But if you're, that's $700 a week on top of your base pay. Anyway, I tell you all that to tell you that tips are important. It's a big part of your income. It's going to be a big part of your income, and it is one of the big differences between I was making something like $500 a week for quite a while, and now I'm making something like $2,000 to $2,500 a week. And a big part of that is my tips. So, on that note, we're going to get into tipping etiquette. First thing is, don't be afraid to mention the tip jar. A lot of musicians find this uncomfortable, distasteful to like it's kind of like they have their hand out begging. Don't be afraid of that. There is a way to do it. I mean, there's definitely a way to do it that's offensive, but there are ways to do it that are fun and make it can even be a even if it didn't result in more money for you, would be a fun part of the show anyway. It'd be something that the audience would enjoy. There are jokes about the tip jar that are funny, and people laugh about it and
Use it as a prop.
use it as a prop. Yeah, keep the approach pretty lighthearted about it, but don't be afraid to bring it up. You should bring it up a few times a set at least. A lot of people just don't even think about it. They just aren't. I have people probably at every show kind of look up like, does he have a tip jar? It's like they don't know. So letting them know. A lot of times there are people who would tip but just aren't thinking of it. They're just doing their own thing. They're having a conversation. They're having a meal. They're enjoying the music. They're enjoying your jokes. They're enjoying your banter, whatever. And they just aren't thinking of it, and they walk out. But had you said, by the way, I'm Peter Coulter. I've got tip jar up here. If you like the music, feel free to throw some money at me. No problem. No pressure, but I appreciate, something nice and light like that and just polite. And that can be the difference between somebody who would have given you $5 and not just looking up and be like, oh yeah, shit, here's $5.
Where should you keep it displayed?
You should. So this is actually something I've kind of played with a bit over the last few months, really. It's kind of a recent thing that's changing. Partly because of COVID. We're in Florida, so it's a little bit of the Wild West down here during COVID. Everything's been open for quite a while, but I didn't want to have a tip jar right next to me singing on a microphone. I didn't want to like lure people close to my mouth. You know what I mean? I have been keeping it kind of further away from me because of that, because I don't want to do that, lure people close to my face. But I find that having your tip jar far away from you makes it hard to to associate with you. You really want it to be pretty close to you, and you want it to be elevated so that people can see it for the most part. If you possibly can, I will usually put it on a stool or a chair so that it's up. This is not like at foot level. Yeah, but I generally find that near you is the way to go. There's kind of a balancing act here. If there's foot traffic going by, like if you're playing in a mall, you want it to be near the foot traffic, for the most part, but you also want it's I think more important that it's near you, because people want to be able to look at the musician, say, oh, I like this, and then in the same view go, oh, a tip jar. Mm-hmm. Like they want to know, if you bump into a tip jar, like as you're walking down through the mall and you look down, you don't know what it's for, and you get like, you don't want people to have to analyze what the fuck is going on to get that they should tip you, right? It should be, oh, 1 unit. There's a musician with a tip jar, So that I have found definitely changes the input of tips, having it close to you.
Should you do anything to it to kind of get it to stand out instead of just like a simple jar?
Yeah, so I've played with different things with this over the years. I put lights on mine. I put little battery operated Christmas lights. I like a big tip jar for that kind of similar reason. You want it to be visible. You want people from the back of the room to be able to see that you have a tip jar.
Tip jug.
So, yep, big old. It was a cheese balls jug for a while. It said tips on it in big bold letters. That worked extremely well for me. I got a new thing now that's like a kind of like a bucket. It's like a square kind of bucket that's kind of colorful. I got lights on it. I don't have tips written on it yet. I think I'm going to, because at least one person a week, at least, I'd say maybe even one person a gig, comes up and is like, is this the tip jar? And like, they don't know because it doesn't say tips on. Again, you want this to be no brainer for people. You want this to be simple. It should probably be, now that I'm talking about it out loud, I'm going to put tips on mine. I'm going to write a sign. I do have a sign that I put to the side of it that says, it's like a little felt board or whatever, a letter sign. It says, tips please, and then it's got my Venmo on there. That's another kind of thing that is a fairly recent development. That also has lights on it. I'm still figuring out how to get that elevated. It pretty much usually sits on the floor, and I've found that I have gotten I think more Venmo tips. It's hard to say. This correlation is not necessarily causation, but I have been trying to figure out how to get that elevated so people can see it better. Yeah, I think the general theme here, we're going to talk about, like we kind of always do, the telescoping. Talk about general themes, and then zoom in, zoom out, talk about general themes, and talk about more specific ideas. So the general theme is you want this tip jar to be visible, easily associated with you. You want people to know what it is, where it is. You want people to be able to... people are shy a lot of times. You want people to be able to feel confident that they can stand up from their table, walk right over, drop money in, and walk back to their table without like having a weird, awkward, thing happen.
Yeah.
Like, you want people to be able to easily envision themselves giving you a tip. So there's a big old obvious tip jar that says tips on it. That helps. That's like right next to you. That helps. Elevated so they can see it from the back. They don't have to come up and search around. That helps. Definitely recommend having Venmo. I don't have Cash App. I know some people do, but I don't. I just think Venmo is so much more popular, and Cash App is simple enough. If you want to do Cash App too, do it. If this might be a regional thing. If Cash App is super popular among your group of people that then maybe you want that too. I highly recommend that. I'd probably average. It's pretty often that I get no Venmo tips. I've played to a lot of older crowds, but I probably average $10, $15 in Venmo tips a gig, because sometimes I'll make $100 on Venmo, and sometimes I'll make 70, and sometimes I'll make 20, and sometimes I'll make 5, and sometimes it'll be days where I don't make any. But, on average, if I make $10, $15, I play hundreds of gigs a year. That's thousands of dollars. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I get kind of off topic here. We're talking about the tip jar.
It wasn't off topic.
Yeah, all right. Keep it displayed, obviously,
Anything
visible.
Else you should be keeping
lights. Yeah. This is another kind of little trick here. You should pin a bill to the edge of it with like a paper clip. I use duct tape underneath it, so I like kind of folded piece of duct tape over itself so that it's got two sides, and I stick I use a 20 now. I started with a 1, I moved to a 5, then I moved to a 10, and now I'm at a 20. I'm kind of just experimenting with it. Like, I don't want to scare people away by putting a 20 on there. I don't think it has that effect. I think it just catches people's eye. Like, people, a bill catches people's eye. If they see a bill hanging out of something, people look twice at it, and it's just another thing that's like, that's money. That's where you put money if you like the musician. And it gets people primed for it.
Yeah.
Also, I think putting a 20 on there lets people know that if you really like it, a 20 is not inappropriate, So anyway, I've got a 20 up there. The funny thing about that is maybe a couple times a week, you'll have somebody, usually a little kid, come up and be like, I'm trying to put this 20 in. It needs to go in. It needs to go in. And it's like, it's on there taped for a reason. It's just like, and so it'll be prepared if you're going to do that you got to talk to a kid gently. You got to say like, hey, that's actually stuck on there. Leave that alone. That's the bait dollar,
Prop.
Yeah, it's a prop. Exactly. So that's, I call that the bait dollar. And it's, usually that'll get a chuckle when I say that. When somebody like tries to, I've had adults try to put it in too, and it's like, that actually stays there. That's the bait dollar. Sometimes it'll get a chuckle, and sometimes it'll get like a bait. That doesn't make me feel very, I've gotten that vibe, but I don't think it's ever affected anything. Can't say for sure, but if you want to call it a bait dollar when someone asks about it, then you can do that.
Is there anything else you can put by the tip jar? Kind of give yourself some free marketing?
Yeah, definitely. I put business cards up there, and I highly recommend everybody do that because it gives you a great reason to mention the tip jar in a way that's not like tip me. So you want to be able to mention the tip jar as often as possible, really. But just saying after every song, hey, I've got a tip jar, you can put money in it over and over and over again, that's not a good look, I don't think. So if you put your business cards up there by the tip jar and you say, hey, everybody, if you like the solo thing that I'm doing here, I say solo thing because I'm also in a band. If you like the music that I'm doing up here, feel free to, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, most importantly Venmo, Peter Coulter Music with a K, Kolter, Peter Coulter Music. I've also got business cards right up here by the tip jar. I don't say it like that, but I'm just accenting it for you. So yeah, I've also got business cards up here by the tip jar. If you'd like a business card, come on, grab one. They're right here by the tip jar. And it gives you a reason to mention the tip jar without soliciting for tips every single time. You want to stay near your tip jar as much as you can, even on breaks. This is kind of something I learned over the years, that people want to be seen tipping. They don't want to. I've even had people tip me in the break when I'm going to get food or something and come find me and say, hey, you were really good. I threw some money in your tip jar, because they want you to know that they're tipping you. It's almost like a waste of money to not be appreciated for tipping, to some people, and to some extent. They want you to know that you appreciated the music enough to tip them. That's like part of the thing, is they want a good feeling from it. Yeah, it might be a whole different podcast episode to talk about just the psychology of why people tip, but that is a big reason, is they want to be partly they want to be seen by other members of the audience. Look, I've got money. I enjoy music. I know what to do here. I'm kind of culturally sensitive to this thing, but they also want you as the musician to see. So stick around by the tip jar if you can. At some gigs, I'll go get my food and I'll eat it next to the tip jar. Like that's like if there's a table nearby, I will do that. And I've also had people who've been sitting there enjoying the show the whole day, to me looked like they were clearly going to tip, and I take a break and they're gone by the time I get back. And sometimes, with no tip, the only way I'd know that really is if there weren't very many tips in the jar, but it definitely happens. I will say this though, some of those people they were never going to tip anyway. They're just looking for a non-awkward way to be like, oh, this guy knows I enjoyed it, but I don't want him to see me walk out without tipping him, because that would be awkward. Which, frankly, if you're in the audience watching music and enjoying it and clapping, you don't have to tip, but you should. You should. You look really cheap if you're clapping and going, "Woo, this is great! I love this," and then you leave without tipping. It just looks cheap. $1 is, enough to not do that. I'll be honest. Even when somebody comes up and puts $1 in, there's a reptile brain part of me that's like, oh, come on, man, $1. but you always, here's a big part of tipping etiquette. Always, always, always say thank you sincerely. Smile, because it's a tip, right? It's not part of your contractual obligation. It's on top of it's a tip. It's something that somebody did not have to give you, but they did. I'll tell you this. I take this to what some people might call a bit of an extreme. When somebody puts coins in my tip jar, which is, by the way, if you're an audience member, don't fucking do that. Even quarters, it's like, I mean, come on, man. Mm-hmm. Even quarters. It's just like, it's just not, it doesn't feel right. It's just like something weird about it. If it's not quarters, you're absolutely wrong to do it. Just like, don't even think about that. Quarters are like on a borderline. If you give me 4 quarters or 3 quarters, it's like, okay, at least this is like money that actually means something in some way, maybe like for a toll. But I mean, dimes, pennies. I've had people throw fucking dimes, nickels, and pennies in my I don't want your fucking change, dude. I don't want that, you know? Little kids do it. In that case, I mean, they're little kids. It seems like a lot of money to them. But even then, even when an adult who should know better puts dimes and nickels and pennies into my tip jar, I say, thank you so much. Because you know what? I mean, even if they were trying to be a dick about it, which I don't think they ever are, really. They just don't know, right? Mm-hmm. But even if they're trying to be a dick about it, the right response is, oh, thank you so much. Kill them with kindness. That's kind of a good background rule for this whole job anyway. But say, man, thank you so much for a couple of reasons. Saying thank you over the microphone when somebody approaches the tip jar signals to the rest of the audience that somebody has tipped you. It signals to the rest of the audience that you are somebody worthy of tipping. Somebody's doing it. It signals to the audience that you're thankful for whatever tip you're going to get, that you're going to say thank you when they come up. It's good. I will say thank you to people as they leave a lot of times, almost just to maybe even if they didn't tip or anything. Thank you guys for coming in. I appreciate you. Thank you. As they're walking out, to signal to the rest of the audience that maybe these people did tip. I'm thanking them just for being here, you know? Yeah, so the tip jar should be pretty large. I'd say large enough so it almost never looks full. That's a good move. You don't, like, when a tip jar looks full, there's a psychology thing that goes on here where people just go, oh, he's got enough. He doesn't need mine.
Yep.
Or my $5 isn't going to even make a difference. Look, there's $200 in there. $5 is nothing, you know? If it gets, I used to have a smaller tip jar, and when it got full during a gig, I would empty some of it out. I would pull like 3/4 of it out so that it looked empty again. Do that. Don't let your tip jar overflow. If you're finishing up your set, you should. Usually, I'll announce 2 songs before, or maybe just 1 song before, that I'm about to take a break. I don't just play through and be like, okay, I'm taking a break, bye, and walk away. I say, all right, I got 1 more song or 2 more songs. I'm taking a short break. I'll be right back, everybody. Thank you so much. You know, give them a warning, because a lot of times people are waiting. They're like eating their food, and they're waiting. They do want you to see them tip, but they are just doing something right now. They don't want to just get up immediately and tip. They're procrastinating like everyone does. And you say, okay, I got 1 more song left. I'm taking a short break. And I'll be right back after that. Here we go. You start playing the song. A lot of times you'll see people get up and tip you at that moment, because they're like, okay, I might not be here by the time he comes back from break. I haven't tipped him yet. I'm enjoying this. I want him to see me tip, and he's getting up for a break. So I'm going to tip him right now. Mm-hmm. So like that is pretty common. So give people a little heads up so that it's like a cue for them to come tip you. Oftentimes at the very last set, I'll even make another tip joke out of it, and I'll say, thank you guys so much for being here. I got 1 more song left. It's been a real treat playing for you. I'm Peter Coulter. If you want a business card, they're right up here by the tip jar. If you're a procrastinator and you've been meaning to tip, now's your chance. I got 1 more song. I got 1 more song left. So no pressure. Blah blah blah. But it's up here if you want. I'm also on Venmo, Peter Coulter Music with a K, Kolter, Peter Coulter Music. And that's another little added thing. You can just make a direct comment about tips. You can do it. Make it a joke. Make it light. Make it not sound like you're begging, first of all, and make it not sound like you're expecting it and chastising people for not tipping you.
Yeah, you can take the pressure off and put it on the servers and bartenders.
Definitely also a good move. I do that all the time where I'll say, hey, I do accept tips. I got a tip jar up here. Feel free to just throw money at me. I don't mind that at all. But I will say this. Tipping musicians isn't, strictly speaking, mandatory tipping bartenders and servers pretty much is. Please take care of them. They're working really hard. They have real jobs, unlike myself. You know, little self-deprecation in there. And yeah, it lets you mention a tip and then put it back on the bartenders and server and be like, look, really though, if you're only going to tip one person in here today, make it your server because they're working really hard. It's a tough job. And it gives another like, okay, this guy's not begging. He's just mentioning that tipping is a possibility for us. Very rarely have people complain about you mentioning the tip jar. It's pretty rare to people do it directly to you. It almost borders on heckling, which is also fairly rare.
But has happened to you?
But has happened a few times, yeah. I had one that was almost the opposite of complaining, actually, but I should tell this story first. This guy, I was overdoing it. I was still, this is one of those kind of trial and error things where I learned that there's a way to overdo it. There's a way to do it too much and make it feel like begging or make it feel like expectation. And I was doing that, and this guy had tipped me, and he was really engaged in the show. He loved it. He was having a great time, and he was like one of the only ones. That's why I was acting kind of desperately. It's because I was annoyed. I was putting on a good show, and only one guy was noticing. And I was like, all right, I got a tip jar. You know, I kind of was like frustrated, mentioned it. And the guy's like, oh, you don't have to beg, Peter. You know? And I was like, yeah, I know. I'm sorry. You know, so he was like, he had tipped me. He was engaged in the show. He was like an ally of mine, you know? But that was kind of, it was an eye-opening moment. I was like, okay, even this guy who likes me is noticing that. That's not right. Mm-hmm. If you mention the tip jar and somebody is paying attention, usually if they're paying attention, they're on your side already. Mm-hmm. Like the people who are going to be angry about it or are going to be like, ah, fuck this guy, are the people who are ignoring you anyway. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like mentioning the tip jar, the only people it's going to piss off are people who, first of all, weren't going to tip you anyway.
Yeah.
You know, if you do it right, if you do it in a lighthearted, fun manner, if you do it in like a judgmental, weird way, like I've done before, I mean, I feel like I've only done it once or twice, but I've kind of like, you push and you find the line and then you back it up from the line. Pretty much this is why I encourage, I'd say err on the side of mentioning the tip jar more than not, because again, the people who are going to be pissed off by it aren't fucking paying attention to you. They don't care. Yeah. They're just like, yeah, okay, whatever. Unless you do it in a like an overtly annoying way that's like, man, I have to look up. You're shrieking about a tip jar. I have to look up and stop what I'm doing because you're making so much noise about or whatever, you know. But you're not going to do that. Yeah, people who are going to be annoyed by something like that are already annoyed by the music. they're annoyed that there's live music, or they're just totally ignoring it and don't give a shit. I think I'd like to go over just a few kind of concrete ways you can mention the tip jar, things that I use to mention the tip jar that usually go over well and often get a laugh, which is really what you're looking for. If you can make a joke about the tip jar, you're winning. That's what you want to do. I'm going to start though with not jokes, but just the really basic stuff. Hey, thank you so much for your tips. They're never expected, but they are always appreciated. Thank you so much. I already mentioned how you should bring up tipping the other staff because it just kind of gets people thinking about, oh, tips. That's something I should do. Again, when you thank somebody, thank them over the microphone. And actually, here's a little joke that goes along with that. So somebody tips you, you say, "Hey, thank you so much." And if you're in between songs, if you're in the middle of a song, it's a little different. In between songs, "Hey, thank you so much," and then you could say to the audience, "By the way, everybody, when you hear me say thank you to somebody out of nowhere, I'm actually thanking someone for throwing money into my tip jar. Anybody could do that at any time. You know, it's like a little bit of a joke.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, a lot of times you can close these, especially if you're getting a groan and not a laugh. You say like, hey, no pressure, but it is greatly appreciated. Thank you very much. Another one. So for mentioning Venmo, I use this one that like 80-90% of the time gets a laugh of some kind, usually from younger people because they know what Venmo is. I'm Peter Coulter. You can follow me on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and by far, most importantly, Venmo. Peter Coulter Music with a KKOLT. And you'll usually get somebody go, ha, 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 Venmo is most important because it's money. You know, it's just like, these are kind of like lame dad jokes, but they work. They work to just kind of like they don't have to be hilarious. You don't have to be, you know, like funny, like really genuinely gut busting funny. It just has to put across the idea that you're kind of joking. It's not that big a deal. You're just messing around. obviously tips would be appreciated, but if not, it's not the end of the world. It's not like I'm starving without these. I would say always thank people for tipping, even when it seems just as your general rule, not even general rule, a rule all the time. Anytime somebody puts money into your tip jar, thank them. If it's a penny, if it's in the middle of a song, anytime somebody puts money in your tip jar, you should be thanking them every time. A big part of this is try to be genuinely grateful about tips. That will make this easier. If you really can connect with the fact that, man, somebody's taking money out of their pocket that they earned and are giving it to me when they don't have to, that's something to be grateful for. That's a nice thing, and just be grateful for it and express it.
Yeah.
What else we got? Oh, another fun thing about Venmo that is, I think, actually kind of a legitimately funny joke. I'll say like, hey, you can tip me on Venmo, Peter Coulter Music with a K. The great thing about Venmo, folks, you could tip me every single day for the rest of our lives if you wanted to, and that pretty much always gets a laugh. People like that one if they're paying attention. Are we ready for the recap?
I think it's time for the tip jar recap.
The tip jar recap. Okay. So, you want to start?
Yeah.
All right, go for it.
The first thing we talked about is having the tip jar in general, and how in the beginning you might not be familiar with whether or not you should have one. And it's going to benefit you greatly the sooner you have one out and available. As Peter had mentioned, in today's day and age with COVID regulations, it might be the best idea to kind of distance the tip jar from yourself. I mean, not far enough that
it needs to be like in the same frame as you. When somebody looks over, it should be a musician with a tip jar, not a musician. Maybe I'll search around for a tip jar. Or a tip jar. Who does this belong to? It needs to be like associated with you. It has to be close to you.
Yeah, and you want it to be large enough so it never looks full. And if for any reason it is starting to fill up when you take a break, go ahead and remove some of the bills from it.
If for any reason it starts to fill up, if you don't suck, it should fill up.
Yeah, and if you don't suck,
I'm kidding.
You're in the right place.
Yeah.
So like Peter said, go ahead and dress it up a little bit. He's got lights on his, which I think is an awesome idea.
You should definitely have lights. Oh, there was one more thing before we finish the recap. I'm sorry, everybody. Okay, so you can kind of create little events. And this is actually something that's not just about the tip jar. You want to kind of create little events within the show, like, oh, the sun is setting. That means something is happening, everybody. Or, oh, that's happy hour is starting, or whatever, You want to know these, you want to be able to mark things throughout time. One of the things you can do if you're playing outside, as I do very often, you want to say okay, it looks like it's nighttime now, so I got a very special thing happening, everybody. Check it out. And I'll go turn the lights on my tip jar. And it's like, okay, it's nighttime now. My tip jar lights are on. And it's just little things like that give you something to talk about, make you feel like more of an event, make you feel like more of an entertainer rather than a jukebox with legs. And that we're going to talk about that later too in a little more depth. But that is just one example of kind of creating events in your sets that is related to the tip jar. So something like that, where if you have lights on your tip jar, it gives you another opportunity to mention it. And say hey, look, it's nighttime, so I'm turning my lights on my tip jar. Look at this.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And I'll even talk to the audience sometimes just about my tip jar, and just say, hey, look, I'm constantly working on this tip jar. Look, it's got lights on it, or excuse me, hit the table. It's got lights on it. Aren't these cool? You can just talk about the thing itself. Say look, I made this.
Yeah, that's the thing. Make it a prop. Make it a part of your act.
Yep.
It's okay to name them too.
Yes. Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah, TJ tip jar.
Yeah.
I love it.
You can be a
Chip,
member of the band.
Chip the tip jar.
There you go, Tippy
Longstocking.
And keep in mind, if you already have business cards, which you should by the time you're doing this, and or promo CDs, merch, it's a good idea to keep that by the tip jar. It gives you another reason to reference it.
Yep, definitely. Keep stuff by the tip jar. Ah, man, now that we're going through the recap, I'm remembering stuff. Something else that I know is big in different environments. I know in Nashville, for instance, people will walk around, they'll have the singer, if they're in a band, the singer will walk around with a portable mic and with the tip jar in their hand and really heavy solicit tips. I don't do that. I'm not sure that it's appropriate for a solo musician to do that because obviously you wouldn't be But in a band, the band is like vamping. They're playing, they're playing playing something over and over again while the musician goes. So the band's still doing something. But if you're a solo guy, you'd just be walking around in silence or during break music with your tip jar. I just don't think it's a good look. I think that will seem like begging in my environment at least. But I know that culturally that can change from place to place. I know that in Nashville, a lot of these bands don't get paid like at all by the bars because there's so many bands and it's like super high supply, and I mean, there's high demand too, but the supply is like just super high. So bands will oftentimes play for free in these bars just for tips. And so they like really solicit tips.
You could try it.
You could try it. Give it a shot and let me know how it goes.
You can hand that tip jar to the first person you see in the line and say, hey, pass this back. It's offering.
Give it a shot and let me know how it goes. And, that's a little bit of a tangent here, but that's kind of one great thing about this gig is that you've got, I mean, I wouldn't do this with your favorite gig ever, maybe, but if you've got 6 different gigs, you're playing at 6 different places, Mm-hmm. So even if you, and I'm not encouraging you to burn bridges, obviously, but you can test things a little more. And even if you do lose a gig, you got 5 more gigs.
Yeah. And
you can replace it with another venue. It's not like, that's kind of one of the, it's a good and a bad thing is that you're not working for one company where if you get laid off, you're just fucked and you have 0 income.
Yeah.
If you screw it up with one venue, you have more. You're kind of diversified in that way. Mm-hmm. I'm not telling you to burn a bridge or to really push your limits with venues and stuff, really. But like, if you want to try something out, try it out. Also, it could be a good idea if you're going to try something that's kind of extreme or weird like that to talk to the manager and see if they're okay with it. Okay, that was a tangent.
No, it was good.
All right.
Now, the only last thing I have for the tip jar is just make sure you have your bait bill. Or whatever you'd like to clip a
bill. Clip a bill to the edge of the jar. It also helps people know that it's a tip jar. Like my jar doesn't say tips on it, as I mentioned, but it does have a bait dollar on it. So that, to me, that's why I thought it would be okay without tips on it. Partly because I've got a little sign and partly because I've got a bait dollar on it. Yeah. Also, I'd have a sign that has your Venmo info on there. What else? Yeah, your business card should also have your Venmo info on it. Yep. Dress up the tip jar, make it stand out.
Always be thanking your tippers.
Always be thanking your tippers. Thank the audience, too, just for being there, too. But, definitely be thanking people for tips. Make jokes about the tip jar. When you're asking for tips, and you should ask for tips, make it light. Make it fun. Make it not sound desperate or judgmental, like you think they're cheap, even if they are. Thank people. Be grateful. Be light about the tip jar, but don't not ask. You should ask.
And don't stray too far away from the tip jar during your breaks.
That's right. Don't stray too far from the tip jar because people want to be seen tipping. Yep. They want to be seen by you tipping. So if you stick around, a lot of times you'll end up with more tips. Some people are waiting for your break so they can scoot out. It's pretty fucking lame. If you're one of the people who does that, I'm sure you're not doing it really consciously, but think about that. Really? You're going to sit there and visibly enjoy a show and then sneak out when the musician's on a break? Come on, man. Anyway, that happens probably once a week.
Jeez.
It probably happens more often than that, right? I just don't notice it because people don't, in the same way that people want to be seen tipping, people don't really want to be seen not tipping. So
yeah.
This is actually another kind of an argument for taking fewer breaks, which I've been doing lately. If the crowd is really good, I will take fewer breaks instead of, so if it's a 3-hour gig, the textbook answer is two 15-minute breaks. So you do an hour set and 2 45s or something like that. 2 50s and a 55. I think that adds up. Nope, that doesn't add up. 3 50s, right? Whatever. 2 15-minute breaks is kind of the textbook answer for a 3-hour show, but lately, if the crowd is good, I'll take one break right in the middle. I'll take a 20-minute break in the middle or 15-minute break in the middle and get right back to it because the tips are flowing and I don't want... I do think people do this kind of just on accident, too. They happen to be leaving while you're not on stage and they're like, I was going to tip him, but he's not there, so who cares?
Yes.
Yes. I don't think it's like malicious necessarily.
Nope.
So the more you're there, the more people are going to be like, okay, I'm leaving now. Oh, I'm going to tip the musician because he's sitting there looking at me,
Staring.
Yeah, he's staring at me, drooling. So yeah. Anyway, where were we? Don't stray too far from your jar during breaks.
Yep.
Always thank your audience when you thank somebody. Thank people over the microphone. I think that's it.
That wraps it up.
Yeah.
All right, guys, that concludes tipping etiquette.
All right. Good job, everybody. Thanks for listening. We will see you next time. Well, we won't see you, but we'll hear you next time. We won't hear you, but you'll hear us next time.
Yes. Tell your friends. We are now on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Podbean, Mercenary Musicians on Instagram, Facebook as well.
Yep. Thanks for listening.
Check us out, guys.
See ya.